So a few weeks back I painted this fantastic Napoleon miniature which Warlord Games sent me to coincide with the release of the Napoleon movie, a movie which may not have gone down too well with historical wargamers in their reviewing of it. But Warlord Games have very kindly sent me this month's Soldier of Fortune, which is Arthur Wellesley, the Sepoy General from his time in India. As many of you will be aware, my introduction to the Napoleonic period was actually through reading Bernard Cornwell Sharp's series, which is obviously a fictional story as well, with loads of liberties taken. But from some of the stories I've heard about the Napoleon movie, they were probably a bit of a safer way of getting an idea of warfare at the time and some of the characters involved. And while we're here talking about books, let's talk about more fiction. I really enjoyed the Simon Scarrow, Wellington and Napoleon Quartet. A set of 4 books that takes you through the background and history of both generals, right from their younger days at school all the way through to the Battle of Waterloo at the end. Obviously also fiction, loads of liberties taken I'm sure as well, but they're much closer to what I've read around Napoleonic history, and if you haven't read them already I would highly recommend them. But anyway, this isn't a book review, this is a video about how I painted the Soldier of Fortune number 5, the Sepoy General, that Warlord Games very kindly sent me. So welcome to Miniature Realms, my name's Stuart, let's crack on. I have to say I am a big fan of this sculpt. It's very nicely done, and I love the studio paint job as well. I'm not sure who did it. I'm going to guess at Kirsten. It looks like the similar style to the Napoleon miniature, but I could be way off. But I started by priming the miniatures black. And then I spent a bit of time preparing the miniatures with underpainting, zenithal highlighting, whatever you'd like to call it. But essentially, I spent quite a lot of time with the airbrush and my white, making the miniatures ready to take some glazed base layers using my favourite contrast Army Painter Speed Paints and Vallejo Express Colour. I went a little bit further and pretty much painted the whole thing white with the airbrush. I did leave a little bit of the dark shadows in there, but the horse is white himself, and I wanted to make sure that I had a really nice base layer to work from, so pretty much painting in white and leaving a little bit of a shadow in was where I went. For the Wellington miniature, I was a little bit more top down. I still spent a bit of time making sure I got a good amount of white on the face and on his breeches because they are white, but still I left that little bit more black, showing a little bit more grayscale. Not always as easy to see on the video it is in person, but trust me, it's there. If you don't have an airbrush, I would recommend priming grey for Wellington and giving him a heavy dry brush using the soft makeup style brushes, taking your time a little bit so you get that two-tone effect, which is really handy for using the contrast style paints. For the horse you could do the same thing, but I'd probably recommend going for a straight white prime. So I decided to start with the horse, and I started with the white colour. We have Templar white from Express Colour from Vallejo, and I think that 50-50 with their own medium, but pretty much any medium, a thin medium anyway, that works with contrast paints will do. I applied the colour all over the flesh areas of the horse, making sure I allowed it to pool in the recesses, and this paint really does its job there. You're essentially giving it a bit of a shade really when it comes to white, forming in those recesses, giving you a nice grey shadow. Don't worry too much about it pooling on the flat areas. You can clean that off with a clean brush afterwards. I often dip my brush back in the water pot, give it a quick wipe off, and then I can take away any excess. Now I quickly popped over to Wellington at this point and used the same method on his trousers, which are obviously going to be white, and there are a couple of white areas also on the back of his coat. It doesn't matter too much whether you catch these because you're going to be highlighting white later anyway, but I picked these out at the same time. So now back to the horse, and we have contrast Basilicanium Grey and Templar White, and I did a bit of a 50-50 mix here. I wanted to tone down the greyness. I want the hair on the horse to look slightly darker than the hair on the rest of the flesh, but I didn't want it too dark so it was too stark either. So I found a 50-50 mix here, and I did drop a little bit of medium in just to help it flow. It seemed to be the perfect colour. Now we move on to the horse's saddle and cloth, and we've got Express Colour, Nuclear Yellow and Wasteland Brown. I had both of these on the palette at the time. I mixed between them and blended them together. The Wasteland Brown, I focus around the edges of the blanket and the tassels, so it really goes into the edges. And then in the centre, I went with the Nuclear Yellow, which was a little bit lighter. I do spend a little bit of time blending them together. These style of paints are super easy to wet blend as long as you don't allow them to pool too much, otherwise they just mix together. So you want them to be wet and on the miniature as a thin layer, and then you can just mix them and blend them together pretty easily. So now onto the horse's socks. I start with a layer of Warlord Grey from Army Painter Speed Paint. So I'm working from the bottom of the hoof all the way up above, or just getting close to the knee, or whatever that part of the horse is called. And I'm going to go back and do a later layer in a moment to darken it up a little bit, but I wanted to make it a little bit gradual, so this is almost layering with a contrast style paint. Now moving on to contrast Black Legion to continue those socks on the horse. So what I'm going to do here now is to concentrate the darker colour towards the bottom, leaving a little bit of that grey showing, so you've got that layering effect. For all the leather work on the horse, I'm using contrast Cygor Brown. It goes lovely over the sort of white primed horse. I'm just spending some time here working my way around, doing my best here not to overspill onto the white if possible. Spend a little bit of time creating that nice white base, and I don't want to mess it up too much, but I'm painting the white next, so if I do make a mistake I can still fix it. So now it's time to focus on that white, which is a big part of the horse, and I'm using some Pro Acryl Bold Titanium White. Now I've heard lots of amazing things about this paint, and it's one of those things, you know, all these people say how fantastic it is, top painters saying how good it is, and I've just never got around to trying it. I found some whites I liked. This is quite thin. It feels like the viscosity of a lot of ready mixed air paints, maybe like the Game Air or something like that. But I was really impressed with this. It went through the airbrush really well, and that was white. That was the white I was using earlier for the underpainting and the priming stages, and now using it to sort of fill back out those white areas on the horse, really build on top and build the highlights now that I've placed the grey shade essentially on there. And I was just so impressed about how easy it was to control, how easy it was to get a nice smooth finish. It wasn't chalky at all, and I fell in love with it. It's a really good paint, so I'd recommend trying it if you haven't already. This really is one of the most important parts of painting this miniature. The white horse is going to really draw the eye, so I'm just taking my time working around and just really working on those highlights that are already showing because of the contrast stage. You've already got that bit of shadow built in using the Templar white mix, so I'm really just going back to those top flatter areas that are already showing us slightly lighter, and then reinforcing them with thin layers of this Pro Acryl Titanium White. Citadel colour is nearly always a safe place to go with yellows. Yellows can be slightly problematic, and I find that Avalanche, Sunset and Phalanx Yellow are both very robust and very easy to use. I've got both of these paints on my wet palette at the moment. I'm just slowly filling in the colour a little bit here on this blanket on the horse, making it a little bit fuller and a little bit brighter, but trying to do it stage by stage and not kind of end up with these really stark bright layers. You can see I'm slowly building up the layers bit by bit and moving towards a Phalanx Yellow top highlight just around the edges of some area of the cloth. I also did 2 layers working around all these little tassels around the edge of the cloth as well, and they just take a little bit of time. If you do mess up, like I have quite a few occasions here, you can always go back with a Wasteland Brown or something like a Nasdrag Yellow, and just with a brush just paint in the dark shadow on a couple of the little tassels if you accidentally paint over more than one at a time. In the end, we get there and it starts to pop and looks like it's got multiple layers on it, and you're going to sit a miniature on this anyway, so half of it's going to be hidden, so don't worry too much if it's not quite the way you want it. Now turning to model colour chocolate brown, and what I'm doing here is just highlighting some of the areas of the horse's tack really, and making sure that the areas where it's a little bit lighter in the center of these strips of leather stand out a little bit from the darker Cygor brown. If you go a little bit too much, you can always return to the Cygor brown to just dull it down a little bit, either it's a glaze or back in as a shadow. Then after that, turning to deck tan and just doing a tiny bit really of edge highlighting on those same areas of leather. So I'm just catching it with the side of my brush here. And then when we get to the flatter areas, just painting in a couple of lines. Again, if you make a mistake here, you can go back with either of the 2 previous browns, dull it down a little bit, glaze it down a little bit, and it looks absolutely fine. So I've got the Cygor brown back out again, and what I'm going to be doing here is painting in some of the animal print that is shown on the studio paint job on this cloth here. Now, again, you're just doing a suggestion of something. This is a gaming miniature. Hopefully you'll be able to use this with some sharp practice games or something like that. I might try Chosen Men at some point, and I still want to do some skirmish games using the Silver Bayonet rules, but without any gribblies in there, just using it as a method to do very, very low figure skirmish games. So I thought it'd be fun to have Wellington in India involved in one of those at some point. So that's what he's going to sit in my cabinet and wait for that. But anyway, I want this to be a gaming miniature. I want it to be a nice looking gaming miniature, but a gaming miniature nonetheless. So I'm not going to worry too much here about these looking absolutely perfect. So I just looked at the shapes on the studio paint job and did something that sort of closely resembled it. Like I mentioned earlier as well, Wellington's going to be sitting on this, so his legs are going to be covering half of what you painted anyway. Now we're getting close to finishing the horse for now, so I'll get some metallics down, and this is black metal from Scale Colour, from Scale 75, and if you watch any of my videos you'll have seen this paint a million times. I'm using this as the base for all my silver metal areas. Following up with my next go-to, which is Game Air Silver, which is always my highlight for the same metal. If you are enjoying the video, then a like is a really fantastic way of helping the video get seen by other people, and I'd be really appreciative of it. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. For anyone looking to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon. There will be a link in the show description. There are a few different levels on there, ranging from just basic thank yous all the way up to some painting tuition with me. So have a little look. I'd greatly appreciate it. And I also have a Discord channel now where you can get and chat painting with other viewers of the channel, and it's a really nice place to hang out. And there are some extra levels for patrons too. So moving swiftly over to Wellington, we're starting with his skin. This is dwarf skin, or dwarf skin without the R. Thank you, Vallejo. And we're basing all the flesh areas with this. Sticking with the Vallejo Express colour range, we move over to Gloomy Violet and Deep Purple. Now the Gloomy Violet I like to use around the cuffs, around the collar on the neck, maybe underneath the brim of the hat, anywhere you're going to be in shadow, or the skin's going to be in shadow. Just add a little bit of the depth there. And then when we move on to the Deep Purple, it's almost a reddish colour, so I like to add this around the nose, the lips, around the cheeks, that kind of thing, to add a little bit of warmth and give that skin a little bit more of a multi-tone to it. That gives a nice effect as it is, but I want to highlight those areas a little bit, and I'm using the Vallejo and Noctura range. We've got natural flesh and fairy flesh. The natural flesh has got a sort of a brownish, tannish tone to it, and I find that it works very well over the base colours used here. It might vary if you're using slightly different colours or slightly different contrast style skin washes, but I find that just having it quite thin on the palette and adding it to the cheekbones, bridge of the nose, but trying to leave some of that existing colour underneath just kind of makes it pop a little bit more. Follow the same method up on the hands as well, again trying to be careful that you don't remove any of that natural shadow that you've created with the zenithal style priming, and then adding all these contrast style paints. They all slowly add to that depth, but taking your time, building it up, focusing on the tops of the fingers and on the knuckles. Then with that lighter fairy flesh, going back again and doing the similar thing, but just covering less of the area, so more onto the edge of the nose, the tops of the cheekbones, maybe on the bottom of the chin, that kind of thing, and just really making it pop a little bit more. So the hat itself is going to be a slightly different white colour, so I'm going to go for a mix of Skeleton Horde and medium. I'm just popping that on now and using it a bit like a glaze or a wash, and making sure that it settles in those recesses, and I'll be coming back to highlight that later. For the facings on the jacket, we're going to be using contrast also in blue, so that's on the cuffs and on the collar. For the body of the jacket, we're going to be using contrast Blood Angels Red, which is this beautiful, rich colour which I've used in so many videos before. It just goes fantastically over a white prime or a grey prime, or like this, a pre-shaded or pre-highlighted prime. It just really gives you a lovely base to work from, and looks pretty good on its own if you're just painting at a more basic level and not planning on doing any further highlights. As I work my way around the miniature, I'm trying to keep it in the areas that I want it. There's lots of white on this miniature that I want to stay as white as possible so I can get the best effect from highlighting it later on. But also, all of the other contrast style colours do work better over the miniature in this kind of grey stroke white scale prime anyway. So I'm taking my time trying to not get it over those areas too much. If I do get a little dab here or there, I wipe it off straight away, or I'll come back with a white or grey paint afterwards just to touch it up. So there's a few leather areas on the Wellington miniature as well, and for that I'm returning to the same brown that I used on the horse. So we're talking about Citadel Contrast Sidegall Brown. It made sense to make sure that the leather matches in this instance. So here you can see me painting in the case, which I believe is for the telescope he's holding. And I highlight using the same chocolate brown as well, which was all still wet on my palette. You see I've put brown here on the telescope. Now I know I want some of the telescope to be gold. I'm not sure at this stage how much. So I decided to paint it brown now, and it'll be the perfect base for the gold colours I want anyway. If I decide to go all gold, it'll make no difference. But if I decided I wanted to leave some areas brown, it's already there and finished. For the officer's sash, I'm going for a slightly different red, and Flesh Terror's red, also from the contrast range, is a little bit deeper, more maroon style red, and it just stands out enough from the colour of the jacket to make it look different. And for the tops of his boots, the turnovers, I'm using the Garagak Sewer colour from Citadel Contrast as well. Again, I wanted a brown on there. I wanted it to be different to the other browns that are already on the miniature, so I felt that this was the perfect alternative option to the Sidegall brown here. And then for the body of the boots itself, I'm returning to contrast again with Black Legion. And at the same time, I will paint in some other bits. So we have the scabbard of his sword is also a dark black leather. So I'll paint that in at the same time. And I'll catch any of the bits that are going to be a gold metallic now as well, which I haven't already covered, because they'll just go slightly nicer over a black colour rather than over the white. My range of golds are all from scale colours, so scale 75, we have Decayed Metal, Viking Gold and Dwarven Gold, and those are those three layers. So what I do now here is work my way around that miniature, putting on the Decayed Metal first. So we have the buckle on his belt, we have the hilt and the pommel on the sword, and also some metal areas on the scabbard as well. Spend a bit of time picking out some of the gold buttons. There's some on his collar and cuffs and on his jacket, of course. And slowly work my way around, moving on to the brighter colour each time, adding a highlight, making sure I'm leaving some of the darker colour left behind. And you'll see as we get to those final layers, it really starts to pop as a nice, vibrant, deepish colour gold, and you get that effect much better by adding the three layers rather than just going in with one single colour. For the edge of the spurs, I'm using the same two metal colours that we did earlier on the horse. So we've got the black metal and then we've got the Game Air silver. For the really small areas like these little buckles here, I'm just gone straight in with Game Air silver and just painting a little square over where it should be. And there's no surprise that I ended up painting pretty much the whole telescope gold, but starting with the brown colours and then going in with the nice brownish decayed metal means that the gold looks like one that's used and worn rather than something that's too ornamental. I'm sure it's a pretty expensive device owing to its owner, but again I feel like it's not too shiny, it's not going to catch the sunlight too much and give your position away, and I think it fits in quite nicely. To highlight the Asurum in blue, I'm going to be using a layer of Techless blue, and this is just a little bit on the wet palette, and I'm just focusing on both edges of those cuffs and a little bit around the collar as well. To add a slightly further highlight, I've just added a little bit of white to the Techless blue that's already on my palette, about 50-50, and just gone back in and added a little bit more to make it pop. To highlight the sash, I've chosen base Mephiston red from the Citadel colour range. Much like the yellows, the red range from Citadel is very good. I would highly recommend it. Then for the main body of the jacket, we've got two colours. We've got Evil Sun Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. And we start off with the Evil Sun Scarlet, work my way around, very traditional style painting here, highlighting on the raised areas, taking my time, some lines, some slight blending in, and then I'll work with a mixture of both two paints to go back again and do a further layer. And then after that, go back round with just some Evil Sun Scarlet on its own. The joys of having both colours on the palette at the same time, it's very easy to mix them together, especially on a wet palette, and then you can just play around with it a little bit. If you find something's a little bit too bright, you can go back in with the darker colour, and then the same way, if something's not bright enough, you can just add a little bit more of the lighter shade in and really kind of adjust it as you go. I missed off showing the pot of the paint here, but this is model colour German grey, and it's quite a dull grey, nearly black, and I'm just using that to subtly highlight the black areas on the miniature. So we've got the edges of the black scabbard and then also the black leather boots as well. Close to the end now, we head back to our bold titanium white from Pro Acryl, and just like we did on the horse, we're going to highlight all the white areas. So we have a white belt, we have these lovely white breeches here, which there's not much of them showing, so I spent a little bit of time just reinforcing the highlights that are already there, where the pleats in the fabric are most raised, just little lines and things really tend to do the job there. You got those white turnbacks on the back of the jacket to tackle as well, so you make sure you just reinforce those a little bit and pick those out. Then we get to his lovely sun hat, which we've already made a little bit yellowish with the skeleton horde, and just slowly building this up with very, very thin lines. He's actually got a sash or something that's tied around the hat as well, and in the studio paint job it's a little bit brighter, so I thought I'd try and do that slightly here. But really very much focusing on where the raised areas are on the hat and just painting those in with white. At this stage I felt like the white was going a little bit too bright on the hat, so I decided to try something different, and I got some Iron George yellow contrast paint out, thinned it quite a lot. I just glazed a little bit into both sides of the white sash and onto the top of the hat. I really wanted to look like it was maybe a strawish type sun hat. I wanted to look a little bit more bleached and battered than the trousers, and just adding a little bit of warmth back in a different colour. I could have gone back with the skeleton horde, and I nearly did, but I thought I'll just try out a different colour. I like having fun and trying new things out. Then afterwards I went back with the white again and just reinforced some of those highlights that were slightly dimmed by that glaze, and just adding that little touch of yellow changed the colour enough in the way I wanted, rather than what was beginning to look a little bit too white and a little bit too close to the same colour of the trousers and the horse. So after that I stuck him to his base and spent a little bit of time basing. Didn't take too long, normal basing textures and tufts and things like that. Do whatever you do to match your army, and then of course, as I always like to do, is paint a black rim on my bases. Very rarely I go any different colour for that, but you do you and do what you like for those things. There we have Arthur Wellesley, the Sepoy General Wellesley in India. Very, very cool miniature, very kindly sent by Warlord Games, so thank you very much for that. Sepoy General, I believe, was the nickname that Napoleon gave him because of his exploits in India. I'm not really sure that it was much of an insult as he thought it might be. Thank you very much for watching the video. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope maybe you found it useful. I've tried to make it a little bit more conversational, explaining why I was doing certain things at times, and take you a little bit more into my thought processes when I'm painting a miniature for the tabletop. This is very much as how I'd paint a miniature that I was going to game with. It's that kind of standard, but I'd love to know what you think about it in the comments below. If you are planning on painting your own, I'd love to see them as well. The best place you can share that would be in the Discord. There's a number of free channels on the Discord to non-patrons where you can get in and just chat generally and share pictures of your work in progresses and things. And I know that's something I'd like to see more people go and join and do. I've had some lovely comments and conversations with people in the comments on YouTube before, and it's very often leads to, I'm working on this and I've never been able to see what you're working on, because obviously you can't add pictures in there. So do head over there. There's a link in the description. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I do have a Patreon if you'd like to support the channel that way. There's a link to there as well. Thank you to all my existing patrons. I really, really appreciate the support. But it's time to let you go now. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.